My name is Frank. I'm 58 years old now, but I was 53 when this happened. For 35 years, I worked as a land surveyor. Most of that time was spent with the same engineering firm out of Flagstaff, Arizona. It's a good job if you like being outdoors, if you like solitude and precision. It's a job that takes you into the parts of the country that most people only ever see from 30,000 feet or in a glossy magazine. I've staked property lines on the edge of the Grand Canyon. I've marked corners in the middle of the Sonoran Desert, and I've spent more time than I can count in the high pine forests of the Mogollon Rim and the Coconino Plateau. I've always been comfortable in the wild. I thought I knew what was out there. I'd seen bears, mountain lions, herds of elk so big they looked like a moving forest. I've been stalked by a bobcat, bluffed by a cornered javelina, and I once had to spend half an hour up a tree waiting for a particularly grumpy badger to move on. I respected the wilderness, but I wasn't afraid of it. I knew its rules, or I thought I did. What I'm about to tell you happened in late October of 2018. The official record, the one filed with my employer's insurance company, says it was a simple workplace accident. And it was. But it was also something else entirely. I know how this is going to sound. I'm a practical man. I deal in angles, distances, and hard legal boundaries. I believe in what I can measure and verify. If someone had come to me with a story like this 5 years ago, I'd have smiled politely, nodded along, and then dismissed them as a crank or a liar the second they were out of earshot. I wouldn't blame you for doing the same. I'm not looking for attention, and I'm certainly not looking for anyone to believe me. At my age, what other people think of me doesn't carry the weight it used to. I'm telling this because I have to, because it lives in my head, coiled up behind my eyes, and sometimes the only way to get a little relief is to let some of it out. It's like a pressure valve. So, I'm just going to tell you what happened, exactly as I remember it. Before I get into what happened, if you're new here, consider subscribing. I share stories like this regularly. And drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. I always like to know who's listening. All right, let me tell you what happened that fall, on a patch of land that isn't on most maps, west of the San Francisco peaks. The job was an ALTA survey for a new private in-holding. Basically, some wealthy individual from out of state had purchased a massive, multi-section parcel of land, completely surrounded by the Coconino National Forest. Our job was to locate and verify all the original 19th century survey monuments, brass caps, stone mounds, witness trees, and set new markers for the boundary lines. It was a big project, scheduled to take us the better part of 2 weeks. It was just me and a new kid, Leo. He was maybe 22, fresh out of the geomatics program at Northern Arizona University, smart as a whip, but green as the pines we were working in. He was a good kid, eager to learn, but you could tell he was more comfortable with the software than the actual dirt. We'd been on site for 3 days. The work was slow and methodical. The access was rough. We'd take the company's heavy-duty Ford F-250 down a series of increasingly primitive Forest Service roads until we hit a 2-track that was more rock than road. From there, we'd park and hike in, sometimes a mile or 2, loaded down with gear. We carried a robotic total station, a heavy-duty tripod, a GPS rover on a 2-meter pole, bags of lath, rebar, a sledgehammer, mag nails, and our personal packs with water and food. It's heavy, awkward work, and at 7,000 feet of elevation, it'll wind you pretty quick. The area was beautiful, though. A classic northern Arizona landscape, towering ponderosa pines, gamble oak in the understory just starting to turn a brilliant yellow, and the ground a thick carpet of rust-colored needles, dotted with volcanic rock and basalt outcroppings. The air was thin and sharp, with that clean, cold smell of pine and damp earth that you only get in the high country in the fall. The mornings were cold enough to see your breath, but the afternoons were clear and warm in the sun. It was the kind of work I'd built my life around. On the fourth day, a Tuesday, things felt different. The first thing I noticed was the silence. Usually the forest is full of sound. If you just stop and listen, you'll hear the chattering of Abert's squirrels as they chase each other through the canopy, the aggressive squawk of Steller's jays, the tapping of a woodpecker somewhere off in the distance. But that morning, there was nothing. Not a bird, not a squirrel. Just a deep, profound silence that seemed to press in on you. It was a dead quiet, the kind that feels heavy, like a wool blanket in the air. Even the wind seemed to be holding its breath. Leo mentioned it first. We were setting up our first traverse point of the day, and he stopped, looking around with a puzzled expression. He said, "Spooky quiet out here today, Frank." I'd already been thinking it, but hearing him say it made it more real. I tried to brush it off. "Probably a lion moving through the area," I said. "Everything's laying low." That was the logical explanation. A mountain lion or a bear on the prowl will shut the woods right down. It made sense. But for some reason, the explanation didn't sit right with me. It felt thin. The silence was more complete than that. It felt unnatural. That feeling of wrongness, of being in a place where the natural rules were temporarily suspended. It just grew as the day went on. It started as a faint hum of anxiety in the back of my mind, and slowly amplified until it was a constant, low-grade dread. It's the kind of feeling that makes the hairs on the back of your neck prickle. You feel a pressure, a subtle shift in the atmosphere that your conscious mind can't identify, but your ancient, animal brain recognizes as a threat. I found myself stopping my work every few minutes, standing perfectly still, and just scanning the tree line. I was looking for something, but I didn't know what. A flicker of movement, the shape of something that didn't belong. I saw nothing, but the feeling of being watched was intense. It was a physical sensation, like a pair of eyes boring into my back. Leo was feeling it too. The kid was normally pretty chatty, always asking questions about the equipment, or telling me about some video game he was playing. That day he was quiet, sticking closer to me than usual. He kept fumbling with the prism pole, his movements jerky and uncertain. His nervousness was making me more nervous, which in turn made him worse. We were caught in a feedback loop of unspoken fear. Around noon, we saw the elk. We were on a small rise, looking down into a shallow basin, and a whole herd, maybe 15 or 20 of them, cows and calves mostly, came crashing through the trees. They weren't just moving, they were running, full-on panic. Their eyes were wide, and they were moving with a desperation that you only see when something is right on their heels. We watched them thunder across the basin and disappear over the next ridge. We stood there, waiting to see what was chasing them. A mountain lion, maybe a small pack of coyotes, though they wouldn't normally take on a whole herd. We waited, and we saw nothing. Nothing at all. The woods behind them remained silent and still. "Hunters," I said, more to convince myself than Leo. "Probably spooked by some guys in camo." It was archery season for elk, so it was plausible. But we hadn't seen another truck on the road all week. We hadn't heard a single ATV. We were miles from any designated hunting area. The excuse felt hollow as soon as the words left my mouth. An hour later, we found the tracks. We were traversing a line along a dry wash, the ground softer here, a mix of sand and pine duff. And there they were. At first I thought they were from a big black bear, but as I knelt down to look closer, I knew they weren't. A bear track is distinct, flat-footed, with 5 toe pads and a big heel pad. These were canine, unmistakably. They had 4 toes with claw marks, a triangular heel pad. But the size was impossible. Each print was pressed deep into the ground, a good 9 inches long and nearly 6 inches wide. I wear a size 12 boot, and these prints dwarfed my own. I've seen wolf tracks in Wyoming. They're big, but nothing like this. This was something else. What was truly bizarre, what my surveyor's brain just couldn't reconcile, was the stride and the pattern. For a stretch of about 20 feet, the tracks were in a bipedal pattern, 1 foot in front of the other, with a stride of maybe 5 or 6 feet. Then the tracks would drop down, and you could see where 2 other prints, smaller and more hand-like, joined them. And the pattern became a quadrupedal lope, the stride stretching out to an incredible 10 or 12 feet. Then it would go back to 2 legs. It was like it was switching between walking like a man and running like an animal. My mind was scrambling for a rational explanation. A huge dog? A gray wolf from a northern pack that had wandered way south? But the bipedalism, it didn't make any sense. It was a prank? Someone with fake track makers out here in the middle of nowhere? It seemed absurd. I pulled out my phone and took a couple of pictures, but the light was bad under the trees, and the photos came out blurry and indistinct, just dark impressions in the dirt. They don't capture the sheer weight and power that those tracks implied. I told Leo it was probably a wolf, a big one. He just nodded, his eyes wide. I don't think he believed me any more than I did. We tried to get back to work, but the atmosphere had changed. The silence, the spooked elk, the impossible tracks. It all added up to something deeply wrong. The sun started to dip lower in the sky, casting long, distorted shadows through the pines. The temperature began to drop. We were working our way toward a deep, rocky ravine that marked the western boundary of the property. Our plan was to set one final control point on the edge of it before calling it a day and hiking back to the truck. It was as we were setting up the tripod that we heard the sound. It came from down in the ravine, from the deep shadows where the sunlight no longer reached. It was a sharp, explosive crack, the sound of a large, dry tree limb being snapped in half. It wasn't the sound of falling dead wood. It was the sound of something heavy deliberately breaking it, like a man breaking a 2x4 over his knee. It was loud, and it was close. We both froze instantly. I was holding one of the tripod legs, and I just stopped, my hand clenched around the cold aluminum. Leo was standing by the equipment case, his face pale. We stood there like statues for what felt like a full minute, every sense straining, listening to the profound silence that followed the snap. I slowly raised a hand, signaling for him to stay quiet. The woods were utterly still again. And then the smell hit us. It rolled up out of the ravine in a thick, invisible wave. It was the most foul, nauseating odor I have ever encountered. It was a complex stench, a layering of horrible scents. The bass note was wet dog, that heavy, greasy fur smell. On top of that was the cloying sweetness of rot, like a deer carcass that had been lying in the sun for a week. But mixed in with it all was a sharp, coppery, metallic smell. The smell of old, dried blood. It was a predator's smell. It was so thick and potent that you could almost taste it. It coated the back of my throat and made my stomach churn. My eyes started to water. I fought the urge to gag. I instinctively took a step back from the edge of the ravine, pulling my shirt collar up over my nose. Leo made a choking sound beside me. I risked a look down into the gully. It was maybe 50 feet deep, choked with scrub oak, boulders, and fallen trees. The bottom was lost in deep shadow, and in those shadows I saw movement. It was big, and it was dark. It was moving parallel to us, staying just inside the tree line at the bottom of the ravine. My first desperate thought was a bear a very big black bear. But the shape was wrong. It was too lanky, too lean in the torso. The limbs were too long. It was hunched over, moving with a strange, loping gait that was neither bear nor man. There was an unnatural fluidity to its motion, a predatory grace that made my blood run cold. My brain was refusing to process what my eyes were seeing. It was trying to fit it into a known category, and it just wouldn't fit. That was it for me. The workday was over. All my professional instincts were screaming at me to get out of there. I turned to Leo. My voice came out as a harsh whisper, much quieter than I intended, but it was tight with urgency. "Pack it up," I said. "Pack it up now. We're done for the day." We moved with a frantic, clumsy haste, trying to be quiet, but our fear made every sound seem amplified. The click of the latches on the equipment case sounded like gunshots in the dead air. The rustle of the tripod bag was like a forest fire. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. I kept my back to the ravine, focused on the task of getting our gear stowed, but every nerve ending I had was screaming about what was down there, in the dark. I could feel its presence. I could still smell it. I risked a quick glance over my shoulder, and my world broke. It had come up out of the ravine. It was standing behind a cluster of granite boulders on the opposite side, maybe 100 yards away. And it wasn't hunched over anymore. It was standing up. It rose up to its full height, and my mind just went blank for a second. It was like a circuit breaker had flipped in my brain to protect me from an overload. It was not a bear. It was not a man in a suit. It was something else. Something that belonged in the darkest corners of human history, in the oldest and most terrifying myths. It was standing on two legs, not straight up like a person, but with a slight hunch, leaning forward from the waist. Its legs were the most alien thing about it. They were bent like a dog's, with the hocks halfway up. It was standing on the balls of its feet, a digitigrade posture. It had to be 7.5, maybe 8 feet tall, and it was lean, but powerfully built. You could see the thick ropes of muscle under its fur. The fur itself was a matted, coarse coat of charcoal gray and patches of rusty brown, like dried blood. Its arms were long, unnaturally long, hanging down almost to its knees. They ended in huge, 5-fingered hands, but the fingers were tipped with thick, yellowed claws that looked like they could tear through sheet metal. But the head was the thing that will haunt me until the day I die. It was the head of a massive timber wolf, a long snout filled with teeth I could see even from that distance, pointed ears that were swiveling independently, sampling the air, listening. And the eyes. They weren't the eyes of an animal. They were set forward in the skull, more like a primate's, and they held a terrifying, burning intelligence. In the failing light of the afternoon, they seemed to glow with their own internal luminescence, a sickly, predatory amber. Those eyes were locked right on us. It knew we were there. It had known all day. It had been watching us, maybe even herding us toward this ravine. It tilted its head, a gesture of curiosity and appraisal that was chillingly intelligent. A low sound drifted across the space between us, a deep, guttural rumble that vibrated in my chest. It wasn't a growl of aggression, not yet. It was a sound of acknowledgement. "I see you." Leo made a sound next to me, a small, terrified whimper. The creature's ears twitched, and those glowing amber eyes flicked from me to him. Its posture shifted. It took one slow, deliberate step out from behind the boulders. It moved with a silent, fluid grace that was terrifying in something so large. The mask of calm I had been trying to maintain for Leo's sake, and my own, just shattered. 35 years of experience in the wilderness, all my training, all my rational scientific knowledge. It all evaporated in an instant, replaced by a pure, primal terror that was so absolute it was almost a religious experience. This was the monster from the dark. This was the reason our ancestors huddled around fires, and it was real. There was no thought of fighting. That would have been like a mouse trying to fight a hawk. There was only one option: flight. My body took over before my brain could even form the command. I reached down, my hand closing around the heaviest tool on my belt, a 24-ounce mag-nail hammer with a solid steel shaft. It felt pitifully small. I shoved the heavy cordura bag with a tripod and prism poles into Leo's chest. My voice came out as a raw, ragged shout. "Run! Leo, run! To the truck! Now!" We didn't wait for a response. We turned and plunged into the forest, away from the ravine, in the general direction of the truck. We ran with a kind of wild, heedless abandon that only pure terror can fuel. We crashed through thickets of scrub oak, their branches whipping at our faces and clothes. We stumbled over hidden rocks and roots, our heavy work boots slipping on the thick carpet of pine needles. I didn't look back. I didn't dare. But I could hear it. I could hear it coming after us. The sound was unlike anything I've ever heard. It wasn't the sound of a man running or a bear crashing through the brush. It started with two heavy, thudding footfalls, and then there was a different sound, a shift in rhythm and cadence, as four giant paws began to eat up the ground behind us. It had dropped to all fours. The sound was of immense weight and speed, a locomotive of muscle and bone and fury tearing through the woods. Branches snapped, small trees were shoved aside, and beneath that, I could hear its breathing, a deep, rasping, wet sound, like a giant bellows with fluid in it. It was getting closer. The sound was getting louder with terrifying speed. My lungs were on fire. My legs felt like lead. The adrenaline was the only thing keeping me moving. I risked a single, fleeting glance over my shoulder. It was a vision from a nightmare. The creature was galloping, its body low to the ground, covering the distance between us at an impossible rate. Its wolf-like head was extended, those amber eyes glowing with a focused, predatory intensity. They were locked on us. We were prey. Then, the thing I had been dreading happened. Leo, his face a mask of white terror, caught his foot on an exposed root. He went down hard, pitching forward with a strangled cry. I heard a sickening crack, a sound like a thick branch snapping, and he screamed. It was a scream of pure agony. He clutched his leg, his body contorted in pain. I skidded to a halt, my momentum carrying me a few feet past him. I turned back. The creature was almost on him. It was maybe 30 feet away, already starting to rise back up onto its hind legs, its claws extended. There was no time to think. There was no plan. There was only instinct. I raised the hammer in my hand, and with every ounce of strength and terror in my body, I threw it. It was a wild, desperate Hail Mary of a throw. The hammer spun end over end through the air, and by some miracle, it connected. It struck the creature high on its left shoulder with a dull, wet thud. It roared, and that sound, I don't have the words to describe it. It wasn't a wolf's howl or a bear's roar. It was a sound that ripped through the fabric of the world. It was a deep, guttural, impossibly loud blast of sound, filled with so much pain and pure, intelligent rage that it felt like it could shake the trees themselves. It was the sound a demon would make. That roar and the solid impact of the hammer bought us a few precious seconds. The creature staggered back a step, its head shaking from side to side, as if trying to clear it. It let out another guttural snarl, quieter this time, and looked from the ground where the hammer had fallen, up to me. The look in those amber eyes was no longer one of cold, predatory assessment. It was one of pure, seething hatred. It was personal now. It wasn't just a hunt anymore. The shock of being struck by something, of being challenged, seemed to have momentarily broken its focus. I used that moment. I scrambled back to Leo, who was trying to crawl away, dragging his shattered leg behind him. I grabbed him under the arms and hauled him to his feet. A wave of pain washed over his face, and he nearly blacked out, but I shook him, shouting his name. "Leo, come on, get up. We have to move." I threw his right arm over my shoulders, took most of his weight on my own body, and we started to move. It was a grotesque, three-legged race. I was half carrying, half dragging him through the uneven forest floor. Every step sent a jolt of agony through him, and he grunted and cried out with the effort. My own back, strained from years of hauling heavy equipment, was screaming in protest. The truck was still a few hundred yards away. Through the trees, it was an eternity. I could feel my strength failing. Behind us, the creature hadn't resumed the chase. It was standing where we had left it, watching us go. It was letting out a series of low, rumbling growls that were more terrifying than the full-throated roar. It was like it was telling us that it could close the distance any time it wanted. It was enjoying our panicked, painful retreat. Or maybe the hammer had done more damage than I thought. Maybe it was surprised that the prey had fought back. I don't know, and I wasn't about to stop and ask. Every step was a monumental effort. The fear gave me a strength I didn't know I had, but it was a finite resource, and it was burning out fast. Finally, impossibly, we stumbled out of the dense tree line and into the small clearing where we had parked the truck. The white paint of the Ford F-250 was the most beautiful, glorious sight I have ever laid eyes on. It was a symbol of civilization, of safety, of a world where 8-foot-tall wolfmen didn't exist. I fumbled in my pocket for the keys, my fingers numb and shaking so violently I could barely grasp them. The simple act of inserting the key into the door lock felt like threading a needle in an earthquake. I finally got the door open, practically throwing Leo across the bench seat. He collapsed against the passenger side door, his face slick with sweat and tears. I scrambled into the driver's seat, slamming the heavy door shut behind me. The sound was a final, beautiful boom of security. I hit the power lock button, and the thunk of the solenoids was the sweetest music I'd ever heard. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I didn't want to see if it was standing at the edge of the trees, watching. I jammed the key in the ignition, and the big V8 engine roared to life. I threw the truck into drive, stomped on the accelerator, and we fishtailed wildly on the loose dirt, spraying gravel and pine needles as we tore out of there, leaving the silence and the shadows behind us. We didn't speak for the first 10, maybe 15 minutes of that frantic drive. The only sounds were the roar of the engine as I pushed the truck harder than I should have on the rough forest road, the rattling of the gear in the back, and Leo's ragged, hitching breaths. I had the heater on full blast, even though it wasn't that cold, just for the noise, for the feeling of manufactured normalcy. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel. I kept my eyes glued to the road ahead, but my mind was replaying the last hour in a terrifying, repeating loop. The silence, the smell, the impossible size of it, the amber eyes filled with intelligent malice. Finally, once we hit the wider, graded gravel of the main Forest Service road, I risked a look over at Leo. He was slumped against the window, his face ashen. His left ankle was grotesquely swollen, the skin already turning a deep, bruised purple around his boot. "You okay, kid?" I asked. My voice sounded thin and reedy. He just shook his head slowly, his eyes wide and unfocused, staring out at the blur of trees rushing past. He was deep in shock. I knew I had to get him to a hospital. I also knew I had to come up with a story. What were we going to say? "Excuse me, doctor. My partner's ankle was broken during our panicked retreat from a mythical creature." They'd have us both in the psychiatric ward. So I drove straight to the Flagstaff Medical Center emergency room. I pulled up to the entrance, helped Leo into a wheelchair, and went to the admissions desk. The story I concocted was simple, and under the circumstances, completely believable. We were surveyors, working late to finish a job. He lost his footing in the fading light, tripped over a root, and fell down a steep, rocky embankment. A common enough workplace accident in our line of work. While Leo was back getting x-rays and, I assumed, a healthy dose of morphine, a Coconino County Sheriff's deputy came to take my statement. Standard procedure for any accident that happens out on the forest lands. He was a young guy, looked about the same age as Leo, with a serious face and a clipboard. I ran through the story again. I kept it simple. I kept my voice steady. He asked the routine questions. Was there alcohol involved? No. Were we using proper safety equipment? Yes. He then asked something that made my blood run cold. He said, "I heard dispatch talking about a call earlier this afternoon. Some hikers over on the Coconino Trail reported a herd of elk running like they were spooked by something. You guys didn't happen to see anything, did you? Bear, maybe?" I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. I just shook my head. "No, we didn't see anything. Maybe it was hunters." The deputy nodded, writing on his clipboard. "Could be," he said. "We've had a few reports of a problem bear in that general area. Unusually large, and not afraid of people. You're lucky it was just a fall." A bear. A problem bear. It was a neat, tidy box for them to put it in. A way to explain the unexplainable things that people might see and report. I just agreed with him. "Yeah," I said, "real lucky." When I was finally allowed to see Leo, they had his leg in a temporary cast up to his knee. The diagnosis was a trimalleolar fracture, a nasty break in 3 places. He was groggy from the pain medication, but his eyes were clear when he looked at me. He grabbed my arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "Frank," he whispered, his voice cracking. "What was that? What was that thing?" I looked at him, at this young man whose life had just been irrevocably altered, and I gave him the only honest answer I had. "I don't know, Leo," I said. "I don't know, but we're never going back there." Our company had to send a different crew out to retrieve our expensive surveying equipment a week later. I refused to go, and after seeing Leo's injury, my boss didn't push it. They sent 4 men, and my boss told them to carry firearms, just in case they ran into that problem bear. They found the site. The tripod was smashed, its thick aluminum legs bent and twisted into scrap metal. The multi-$1,000 total station was a wreck, its casing cracked and lenses shattered. And they found my hammer. It was lying in the pine needles, caked with dried blood and a few coarse, dark hairs. They left it right where it lay. That was 5 years ago. I'd like to say that time has dulled the memory, but that would be a lie. It's as vivid now as it was that evening. I still have nightmares. Not every night, but they come in waves. In the dreams, I'm always running, but my legs are made of lead. I can hear that wet, rasping breathing getting closer and closer. Sometimes I turn around, and I see those glowing amber eyes, and I wake up shouting, my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest. The world feels different to me now. I spent my entire adult life in the wilderness. It was my office, my sanctuary, my church. I loved the solitude, the quiet dignity of the trees, the feeling of being a small part of something vast and ancient. Now, when I find myself in the woods, even just on a day hike with my wife, the feeling is different. The silence isn't peaceful anymore. It's menacing. It feels like the woods are holding their breath, watching me. I can't shake the feeling of being observed, of being an intruder in a place that doesn't want me there. A year after the incident, I took an early retirement from field work. I told my boss my back couldn't handle hauling the gear anymore, which was true enough. I finished my career behind a desk, training younger surveyors and checking data. It was soul-crushing work for a man who'd spent his life under the open sky. But it was safe. It was indoors. Leo quit the profession entirely. He finished his physical therapy, and as soon as he could travel, he moved back home to Ohio. He works for the State Department of Transportation there, designing highways. We talked on the phone a few times in the months that followed, but we never really talked about it. We'd talk about his recovery, his new job, the weather. But the memory of that day was this huge, unspoken chasm between us. I think he just wanted to bury it, to pretend it was a hallucination brought on by panic and pain. I can't blame him, but I can't forget. In the beginning, I did what I imagine anyone in my position would do. I turned to the internet. Late at night, when my wife was asleep, I'd sit in my office with the door closed and type phrases into the search bar that I was ashamed to even think. Giant wolf creature, Arizona. Man-wolf, Coconino County. Standing wolf monster. And eventually, I found it. I found the term, Dogman. I'd never heard it before. It sounded ridiculous, like something from a bad horror movie. But as I started reading the accounts, the witness testimonies from all over the country, a chill went down my spine. The descriptions were all so eerily similar. The impossible height, the canine head on a humanoid body, the backward bent, digitigrade legs, the unnatural speed and strength, the glowing, intelligent eyes. I wasn't crazy. Leo and I weren't the only ones who had seen this thing. I was a skeptic my entire life. Bigfoot, the Loch Ness Monster, ghosts, UFOs. It was all just modern folklore to me. Fun stories to tell around a campfire, but nothing a sensible person would actually believe. I lived in a world of facts and figures, of empirical evidence. But you cannot maintain that kind of skepticism when you are confronted with the impossible. You can't rationalize away something 8 feet tall and built of muscle and rage that tries to tear you and your partner to pieces. I don't pretend to know what it was. Is it some undiscovered primate, a relic species that has somehow survived in the deep forests? Is it something supernatural, something that bleeds through from another dimension? I have no idea. The questions are too big, and I'm just a land surveyor. All I know for sure is that it's real, and it's out there, in the quiet, dark places of the world. I'm telling this story now, after all these years of keeping it locked away, because I feel like I have to. People deserve to know. We live our lives in these little bubbles of concrete and electricity, and we convince ourselves that we've tamed the world, that we've mapped every corner and catalogued every living thing. It's a comfortable illusion, but it's not the truth. There are still vast wildernesses out there, places where the old rules apply. There are dark corners on the map where things live that defy our science and our understanding. And we need to be aware that we are not always at the top of the food chain. So if I can offer any advice, it's this. If you are ever out hiking or camping and the woods go quiet, I mean dead, unnaturally quiet, turn around and leave. Don't wait to find out why the birds have stopped singing. Don't try to rationalize it. Just go. If you get that primal feeling on the back of your neck, that sensation of being watched, trust it. That instinct is older and far wiser than your conscious brain. You are being watched. Don't try to be a hero. Don't pull out your phone to get a picture or a video. It's not worth your life. Just get back to your car, get back to the road, get back to the lights. Of all the terrifying things I experienced that day, the impossible tracks, the gut-wrenching smell, the earth-shaking roar, the single image that has burned itself into my memory is the look in that creature's eyes after I hit it with the hammer. It wasn't just the dumb rage of a wounded animal. It was a complex, intelligent fury. It was indignation. It was the look of a superior being that had been insulted by an inferior. It knew what we were, small, weak, clever apes, and it held us in complete contempt. In that moment, I understood that it wasn't just a predator hunting for a meal. Its aggression felt deeper, more ancient. It was a territorial hatred. I don't know if we simply trespassed on its land, or if it was actively hunting us from the moment we stepped out of the truck that morning. I don't know if it was a lone individual, or if there are more of them out there. I don't know anything for certain, except that our comfortable modern world is a fragile veneer laid over something much older and much wilder. We are not the masters of this planet. We're just the current tenants, and our lease is more precarious than we think. Sometimes, if you're very unlucky, you wander off the path and get a peek behind the curtain. You see what really lives in the dark. And once you do, you can never go back to seeing the world the way it was. You can never feel truly safe in the quiet places again. So please, be careful out there. Be more careful than you think you need to be.